today's podcast, we're going to be talking about operationally defining behaviors, how to select a behavior, basically how to be a BCBA. How do we do our jobs day in, day out? What does it look like? How do we make these decisions? And then how do we define it? We just need to talk about how to pick those things to measure. What are the steps to doing that is what we're going to talk about today. Before we get into that real quick, I did want to talk about my Patreon. So next week, or technically today, is my first day where I am no longer a full-time BCBA. I have my company and I'm focusing in on building my client base and starting my in-home therapy, all of that. And that allows me to have a little bit more time for this project of podcasting and YouTube. So you're going to be seeing a little bit more content from me. You're going to see more content on the Patreon. So real quick, my plan with the Patreon for you guys is every 20 people that are pledging, so once I hit 20 and then 40 and then 60, every 20 I will be offering a free 1-hour group study session, just Q&A. You guys ask your questions, we can study together. It'll be like a Saturday morning kind of thing. I will send out a Zoom link for everybody and we will meet up and it will be so wonderful. And then on top of that, every 50, so once I hit the 50 mark and then once at the 100 mark, I'm going to upload a full mock with the diagnostic area so you can see which parts of the task list you're doing great at, which parts you're struggling at. I'm going to try to make it as hard as I can. So I'm going to upload one later this week. If you guys want to get in on that, go ahead and join my Patreon, get in on that. And then once I hit 50, I will upload another one for you guys and it's going to be so exciting. Also, my Patreon, you're going to have access to my podcast without ads because on my Spotify podcasts, ads are coming, guys, and I'm so excited. It's going to help me feed my puppies, my babies, and give me more time to make these videos and the content that you guys need. So you guys let me know what you need from me, and I am happy to do that. I am so excited for this new journey in my life and to give you guys this content that you guys are just so wonderfully requesting and needing. It's been an amazing journey thus far, so I'm very excited. We're going to get right into all this material. It's some good stuff. We've got a lot of good terms, we've got a lot of good definitions, so let's talk about it. For this podcast, we're going to be talking about C1 and C2 primarily. There's a lot of applications we're going to tie into this, but I just want to focus on kind of working our way through that task list. When we get to the applications part, once we finish task list C and D, and we're starting to tie in all these topics and the real life stuff, I will kind of reference back to these podcasts. So like, if we're talking about shaping and we're talking about like how to pick shaping and, it applies to one of these podcasts that we did, I'll say, hey, make sure you jump in on, podcast number 13, so that way you can kind of see what I'm talking about and refresh yourself on these topics. We'll be tying all of in later. All that fun stuff will happen then. So just know for now that we are doing task list C1 and C2. First up, to operationally define behaviors, we have to understand behaviors. So we know what behaviors are. We talked about in an earlier podcast. We know that it's anything that a dead man cannot do. When we're talking about behaviors, just think about everything as behavior except laying on the ground and not moving, not blinking, not thinking, all those things that a dead man is doing. Those aren't behaviors. Pretty much everything else is a behavior. So we understand what a behavior is. And now we have to understand how to operationally define a behavior. Let's talk about how we select this behavior, and then we're going to talk about defining behaviors. And when we get into applications, we'll go into a lot more examples and, like, is this it? Is that it? Is this how you do that? And how can we make this better? We're going to do more of like the supervision style, like Q&As of like talking about what a good operational definition looks like. We're going to be talking about that later. So today we're just going to talk about more general examples, ideas, concepts. How do we get to the point where we've selected this behavior and now we're ready to operationally define it? We're going to talk about those prereqs. You ready? Where I always start when I'm getting a new kid, or if I'm looking at like, okay, this kid needs some more programs, a lot of our decisions are driven by insurance. So insurance is a very popular funder. Some families are able to afford private pay, but the vast majority of families are using insurance to pay for ABA, which is totally fine. It's just makes it a little difficult at times because insurance will dictate what we work on, how we work on it, how we define things, what we do. And we have to be careful around those requirements. Like an example of that right now, insurance has a lot of pushback on life skills. So insurance, when I'm saying like insurance, I'm talking about commercial plans, Medicaid, all of that. is pushing back on us teaching kids how to wash their hands, dress themselves. They believe that caregivers should be doing that. And, everybody has their own opinions on that. And regardless of your opinion, that's what insurance feels. They make the ultimate call on those. There are some ways to kind of work around it. So when you're writing these operational definitions, keep in mind that we might have to put things in there or word things a certain way because of insurance, or when we're picking certain behaviors, we're doing it with that in mind, and that's just kind of the reality. Obviously, on the exam, there's no talk of that, so you don't worry about that on the exam, but just something to keep in the back of your head. When you're in the exam, do it Cooper style, very to the point. When you are out in the real world applies, When I'm thinking about what a kid needs, I'm looking at what are their barriers to learning. There's a lot of assessment tools out there that can help us figure out what the barriers are. I like to sit back and watch the kids and see what is stopping them from engaging in group fully, what is stopping them from going to the lunchroom or eating with their friends, what is stopping them from, having a happy day, like what are those barriers? For example, let's say they walk into lunchroom and they're upset because things are out of order, or it's too loud, the lights are too bright, somebody took their favorite spot by the window. It could be that they're really messy eaters, so friends can't sit as close to them, or they don't know how to engage with their friends, so they're just sitting there eating their food. So we look at those things like what skills do they need to be successful in school. That's always a big thing you want to keep in mind in the back of your head. Is our end goal is to always have kids be successful around their peers and happy, engaged. We want them successful in school. So we're looking at those goals. How do we get them to that point? If you're doing in-home ABA, we will work on more of the life skills, but they all apply to school. Like, what tools does this child need in order to be successful? Do they need, a visual schedule? Do they need more timer? Do they need mom to wake them up 20 minutes early in the morning? Those are things that we'll figure out in home, but same thing in clinic. What are those barriers? So you're looking at it, saying, okay, this kid needs to work on these things. I see that they're struggling with this. There's a lot of crying, or, they hit their head, so now they can't be in this environment, so it's not safe. That's where you come in, like, okay, how do we make this safe? How do we come over those barriers? Is going to be your first step when you're evaluating these situations. Cooper talks about 4 distinct steps that will get you from A to B to the point where you can operationally define a behavior and implement plans and understand behavior change. The first step of that is assessment, and that's what I'm talking about. You're assessing behavior. This might be where you have an FBA. So in your master's program, you probably learned about FBAs. This is where you're having those interviews with families, interviewing the people that work with that child in the clinic or at home or in school. You're going to be watching behavior. You're going to be taking data. You're going to get an idea of what's going on with the behavior. That's where you're the professional that comes in, and you're starting to figure out these functions. What is going on here? That is your job on this assessment level. You're taking in all the information. You're starting to try to connect the dots and figure out, why are they doing these things? Why do they struggle with these things? What can I do to help them not struggle? That's our first step. And if you're like, I have no idea where to start, I don't understand, how do I pick out those behaviors? This is where a good supervision program is going to come in, and this is where assessment tools are going to come in. So you have to use the tools you have. So if you are still confused on what behavior barriers there are or what academic barriers there are, remember those are 2 big parts of our jobs, is looking at behaviors, looking at academic skills. Use your assessment tools like the BB Map, AFLS, ABLES, Vineland. All of those are going to be great for looking at and understanding those variables and getting information. If you work with younger ones, the Early Start Denver model is really good for taking out those fine skills. You can do just like CEUs on figuring out, where do I start? How to ABA is a great website that also has resources that talks like, okay, what's first? I have this new kid. Where do I start with communication? They have no language. They don't point. They don't grab. Where do I start? Those resources are amazing. CEUs, websites, Google, Facebook pages, use it all, and you're going to start there. I would definitely use an assessment tool to guide you. Like BB Map is great for figuring out those barriers, figuring out those milestones if you need somewhere to start. Or the Start Denver model is a great place to figure out what is missing in this concoction of trying to figure out those barriers and skills and play. Amazing tool. Love all of them. Check them out if you haven't. If your work has resources available, definitely utilize those. Another great source is ask other BCBAs, what would you do? How do you start? Maybe they're comfortable with you looking over their treatment plans, how they started with a similar kid. Getting those ideas, using your supervision practice. You guys got this. You just have to kind of start and practice. Another really good place to look at is with insurance and understanding autism is those core deficits of autism. So when you're looking at the diagnostic criteria for autism, there's 3 core deficits. There is behavioral deficits, communication, and social deficits. So those are never a bad place to start either. Figuring out, okay, what do I need to work on communication? What do I need to work on social skills? And behavior-wise, and starting there as well is always something that's very pleasing to insurance because you're treating autism. I hate the phrase treating autism. They don't need treated. They're perfect the way they are. I believe they just need some supports, and that's where we come in and help them. We work on teaching, the population that stimming is okay. The way that autistic person behaves is fine. In the meantime, we're going to give them the tools to live in a world that isn't built for them, unfortunately, while we work on building a better world. Number 2 is planning. When we are in the planning stage, what we are looking at is what are we going to do? So you know what behavior barriers are, preventing the child from participating in group or, being able to complete a puzzle. You figured out those barriers. What's going on there? Now we're going to plan. What are we going to do? This is where we're going to have like the BIPs. You're going to be talking to parents, seeing like, have they tried this thing? How does this sound? You'll be working with your therapist to make sure they can implement an intervention that you're thinking of or the skills that you're thinking of. This is going to be where you're figuring out all your targets. So if you know you have a kid who needs to go to group, how are you going to get in group? What are the steps? So this is where you're going to have that task analysis. You're going to be breaking down those little baby steps. Can this child go from sitting in group for a minute to 5 minutes, or do you need to do a minute and 10 seconds, a minute, 20 seconds? This is where you're going to start evaluating and getting to know your learner and your kiddo, trying to understand where are they at. When you're looking at an older population, this is where we're going to be talking to them about what they want to do, how do they want to learn this skill, planning what supports you're going to need, figuring out kind of those strategies and training that's going to happen is your next step. And this could all happen over, a day. This could all happen over a week. And we're going to talk about the pacing that should be happening on these skills in a little bit. Up next is the actual implementation. So we are implementing our procedures and our goals. We're implementing our behavior protocol or our academic program, trying to work on these skill deficits. Maybe we notice that they need help holding a pencil in order to complete worksheets, but they're struggling with that skill and that gets them really frustrated. There could be a lot of layers to this. So you're implementing a treatment package. You're going to start there. This is where you're putting in, you're taking data, you're figuring out, okay, this is working, that's not working. The data collection method that I picked isn't great. If you guys want information on data collection, review the last 2 podcasts, or if you're feeling confident, you should know all the pros and cons of all the data collection systems and that trial and error that has to happen. Sometimes you get it right on the first try, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have to change up because the behavior changes up. Sometimes you have to change up because you realize that wasn't quite right. I'm not getting the data that I need in order to show that my intervention is working or not working. Step number 4 is evaluation. You're evaluating for outcomes. You're evaluating the data. Was it significant? Did it work? Did it solve the problem that you needed to? Did it create more problems? Did you discover, actually, wow, they have this whole other skill deficit I didn't know about, or they're amazing at this thing. You're going to take all the information once your intervention is complete. So for example, if we were teaching the skill hand washing, we got to the point where we assessed, we planned, we implemented it. We're now at the evaluation stage and making sure they can still wash their hands a week later, making sure they're cool with it, they like it, parents are seeing it at home, it's journalizing, it's maintaining. All those terms and all those skills that we learned on other podcasts, this is where they're starting to come in. We're making sure that our treatment was effective. It was useful for the learner. It was behavior analytical. We have the data to show that what we did, our intervention, is what worked, not grandma came over for a weekend and taught them hand washing, and we just get credit for that. That's not the case. We have our data to show our progress over time. Therapists feel like the child can do it with all of them. Journalized and maintained. Your box is checked. This doesn't mean you're done. Now you're going to be looking at that next skill. So now that they can wash their hands, can they wash it when the hands are really dirty? Can they scrub all the dirt off? Can they wash their whole body? And this is where you just keep building on those skills. Or maybe you're done. maybe their hands are washed, they can do everything else, they're good. They just need a little bit of support there, and you move on to a different skill or a different behavior. And you're doing this simultaneously with like 20 different goals, maybe 5 different behaviors. All depends on the kid, on what they're needing and their barriers in place. For some kids, you're going to be working on behaviors at a much higher rate. So you're going to be tracking 5 to 10 behaviors because they have a lot of barriers and not nearly as many academic programs. Or it could be vice versa. So maybe that child doesn't have a lot of behavior barriers, but they have, signs or symptoms of ADHD. So you have to kind of work through those, teach them how to be successful in the school environment. The school environments are not set up for autistic kids, and that is really upsetting and frustrating. In this current moment, though, they have to be able to go to school and have an IEP that can support them, and that's where we're going to come in and help that family figure out what that is. Some terms to note this, you're going to see target behavior. Your target behavior is when you've pinpointed that specific behavior or skill that you are wanting to change. This is going to be where you're going to have an operational definition. So if you see little Johnny is struggling with SIB, so self-injurious behavior, he hits on his head, you're going to use that target behavior of decreasing hitting his head, or increasing fluency of sight words, or increasing the correct spelling for tacting letters. Those are going to be your different target behaviors when you identify the specific behavior that you want to change or modify. In your assessment and planning stage, you're going to be doing indirect and direct assessments. These are another part of the task list to know. So indirect and direct assessments can be kind of confusing. Indirect assessments are going to be scoring tools, talking to families, talking to teachers, therapists, anything where you're not directly observing the behavior. So even though mom is directly observing the behavior, she is observing it and then telling you, so that's indirect. It's only direct assessment if you are directly observing that behavior and taking data on it. So if that therapist is taking data on that behavior while they're with the client, that's a direct assessment. If they are observing the client, taking data, and then telling you about it and you're writing down your own notes, indirect. Indirect assessments is data derived from recollections, subjective scales, and reconstructions of the behavior. So me explaining to you what happened or showing you would be indirect. You could use a data collection on this. You could have open-ended questions or check boxes for parents to fill, like a questionnaire to kind of understand this. You could have ABC data that the parents are filling out in your parent meeting that are check boxes, or you could be asking, so, when you see them bang their head, what's happening? What happened before that? What happened after that? What do you think? Why do you think they're doing that? That is going to be those open-ended questions. For this, you can use different open-ended questions like assessment tools. There's the behavior rating scales. There's different materials online that you can purchase or make yourself. You can do it in a formal way, like an FBA, and fill out like an FBA document. It might depend on what your employer requires. Or you can do it kind of casual. This is why parent trainings are so important. I use my parent trainings to really get to know the family situation at home, because I used to work in clinic. So I would gather a lot of information to understand, why is a kid doing this? What's going on at home that makes them, do this here? What are the variables to this? Using all the information to have those conversations with parents and get information and data on it is going to help you do kind of an informal FBA, or just that information gathering process of indirect assessment. Direct assessment is going to be data collection through precise data measurement systems. For direct assessment, we've got standardized testing, criterion assessments, curriculum, sorry guys, I cannot say that word, assessment, and direct observations. Cooper specifically talks about how there's not really any good standardized testing options in ABA to measure behaviors or to measure academic progress or academic ability. There are some limitations, such as the lack of qualifications for BCBAs to administer the tests that are available. Like, for example, there is Iowa Test of Basic Skills. However, BCBAs are not qualified to administer tests like these. It's just something to note that a standardized test could be a direct observation. However, they typically don't show the learning that has occurred. It just shows where the child is currently at comparison to their peers or their grade level expectations, maybe their developmental milestones. It's not a very useful tool, especially when it comes to measuring behavior. There's not any really good standardized measurement tools for behavior out there at this moment. Then up next, we have criterion assessment. So this is kind of the same thing. This is measuring the progress compared to age or milestones, developmental levels of other kids. Could be useful in certain situations, but not the best when we're looking at how to develop a program. What do we need to work on? It gives you an idea, but missing a lot of information there. But it is another direct observation tool. We have our curriculum assessment tool. This is a weekly progress and weekly understanding of where the kid is at. This is going to be more of like a group level skills that everybody is focusing on. The idea is that this child should have that cumulative learning. They learned a new skill last week, and we're going to build on that just like we do in normal school, the general ed classroom. They all have their curriculum throughout the year. That's a direct assessment tool if we're taking data on that. And then next we have direct observation. So this is where the BCBA is coming in and observing the behavior. We're taking ABC data. I just want to make a note here that ABC data, antecedent data, and temporal sequencing are all the exact same things. It's taking data and recording the exact antecedent, behavior, and consequence that is occurring and measuring it. And then I want to talk about an ecological assessment. This is a different type of assessment. It's not a direct assessment method. This is kind of its own ballpark. An ecological assessment is where a behavior analyst understands that human behaviors functions in multiple events. There's multiple things at play. There could be things in the environment, behavior, all have these complex relationships, those interpersonal relationships that can occur. This is where BCBA understands that. They're going to be looking at those different environments, how everybody interacts with each other. It's a very, very complex information gathering process where you're just going and asking a lot of questions to a lot of people in the environments of this kid. So maybe you're asking what their home life is like, what's their school life like, what's their life at the clinic, how are all these things interacting and maybe causing behaviors, the physical aspects of the environment. Could be like the seating, the lighting, how is it at home? Do they always have to sit in the dark at home too? You're gonna be asking a lot of questions, getting a lot of information. This one takes a lot of practice to be able to sift through that information and find those variables that are relevant. Ecological assessment might be something you want to look into. You can always use direct assessments and indirect. So I'm observing the child in home to gather more information on why they're doing this behavior in the clinic or in school. But I'm also asking parents, and I'm gathering information from their siblings, or I'm gathering information from their teachers, and combining it all together in this whole pile of information. I find that ecological assessments are something we do quite often, just gathering all that information to figure out what is going on and why this is happening or isn't happening. It's very useful. Another term you're going to keep in mind when you're doing these is reactivity. When you're doing a direct assessment procedure, that person is probably going to know you're watching them because you're directly observing or you're taking data directly on their behavior that they're engaging in. So they're going to have reactivity, which is where a person knows they're being watched and that skews the data or skews the person's behavior. It's referring to kind of the behavior change that our assessment has on the person. And Cooper talks about how best practice for the assessment process, when you're in that assessment, that first stage of assessment and you're moving into planning, is to have a wide variety. So Cooper specifically talks about having a structured interview. So if you have a younger client, interviewing the parents, having a structured, planned out Q&A type of thing. At least one rating scale. It could be for them to fill out. It could be for the therapist to fill out. It could be for yourselves. It could be for everybody. And then you're going to want your direct observation. So you need to see this for yourself. If you've never actually seen the behavior, you shouldn't be putting in protocols modifying that behavior. You need to see it for yourself. Everybody has their own opinion, is recalling things in a different way. You're the professional here who understands the function of behaviors. This is where you come in and you make those final calls and determining what proper intervention could go into place. And then lastly, we're also going to do some manipulation of variables. This one you hopefully in your master's program or in supervision have learned about. Like FA is going to be that functional analysis where you are proving that this change in the environment or this manipulation of this variable results in this behavior. So therefore it's this function. Remember when you're doing this that you are putting the interests and the needs of the child first. We shouldn't be putting them in situations that are stressing them out or causing harm unnecessarily. If you know what the function is or you're really sure this intervention would be effective, you do not need to, you don't have to test it more than once or twice or even at all. In a situation that we can kind of talk about a little bit is if this child is engaging in life-threatening behaviors like, talk of suicide or threatening other people's lives, this isn't the time to be gathering all the information and, testing variables and, having interviews and rating scales. This is the time for you to react quickly. And whether this is your company's policies or if you need to make an emergency decision, those are decisions that you need to make following your state laws and guidelines and making sure you're educating yourself on how to do that is important. So having your emergency crisis plan, emergency plan in place for those type of behaviors, not the time to be gathering information. If you have a more serious behavior, but you have like a minute to react, so I'm talking about like SIB, harming themselves, like biting, but not life-threatening, aggressing towards others and adults, where it's going to hurt if they get to you, but it's not going to break your bones, break your skin, too much. You have a minute where you can spend a day or two gathering information, try to figure out a good procedure here. Do that. But if you start to feel, and my personal philosophy is if I am getting injured with this client, something is going very wrong and I need to change this environment because it's not normal. A kid doesn't want to hurt others. There's always a reason behind it, whether it's an ABA function reason or if there's like a psychological reason behind it or medication change. If I can't be in that situation and feel safe, if my hair is going to be getting ripped out, my skin is going to be broken, I need to make a call in that moment, but it doesn't have to be a permanent call. It's just like, all right, let's all back hands off. Let's give them some space. Let's give them a break. Let's back up. We don't need to be trying to follow through on this right now. It's not that important. Their safety is more important and our safety is more important. That's when you step back and maybe you're just going to focus on pairing and playing with that client for the next couple of days while you figure out a plan to make sure that doesn't happen again, while you're talking to parents, having your interviews, having your scales, filled out, things like that. Always be, ready to make those adjustments depending on your company's protocol. But I would always suggest client safety and your safety first over any sort of goal or program when possible. The big thing I want to hit on is when you're talking and planning about what you're going to do and what behavior you're going to pick, you are never going to pick a target behavior purely for the convenience of another person. A really good example of this is stimming. So I had a kid in the past who would stim really loudly and the parents didn't like it. It got annoying, and I mean that in the most blunt way possible. We talked to the parents. They wanted to stop. However, we also had to bring up the fact that this stimming is not causing any harm to the child. It's not causing any harm to the environment. You're just annoyed and frustrated with it. So let's see if we can modify your behavior before we try to change anything in that kid. Maybe if you wore some earplugs when you needed a break, or stepped outside or had them, take breaks in their room for a minute and come back out. We're not secluding them. We're just having them take a break for a minute, teaching them some regulation strategies, getting OT involved if they're stimming a lot, figuring out what we can do to help them and help you rather than just change them. There are behaviors that we can do to help the person help their caregiver care for them. So an example of that is, cleaning food off an older adult might be really challenging as their caregiver gets older. So teaching them how to eat with utensils in order to simplify the life of each other and they have a better coexisting relationship, or that caregiver relationship is a little bit easier, that's okay. And giving those, proper situations where this person needs the skill in order to go into other environments and thrive can be important. So an example that Cooper gives is, eating with your hands is fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. However, if this person's wanting to go out and go to restaurants, we need to work on that skill of eating with utensils because we cannot be messy and getting food everywhere. There are ways that we can compromise on that. So maybe they're going out to a burger restaurant. Eating with your hands is totally appropriate. So maybe that's a good location. But if they want to go eat some soup at Olive Garden, we got to figure out how to use that utensil because, scooping with our hands not going to be appropriate out in public. It's going to be really messy and they have the potential to burn themselves. So we got to look at those situations and kind of figure out what barriers are, what we truly care about versus the social stigmas and social situations you have to kind of talk to the family about and look at your own biases and figure out, does it really matter if this person eats with their hands or chews with their mouth open, or they don't like to wear a shirt? Like, what environments can they go to where they aren't having to wear a shirt? Like the beach. Do they like to go to the beach? If they want to go in Walmart, we've got to work on that because there's laws that apply, right? So kind of getting your cultural awareness from, your practice and research and understanding that a lot of eating practices or behavior expectations come from culture, and that's okay. You just have to work on figuring out what actually matters to the family, to the environment, what are the laws that apply to these behaviors. Making those kind of decisions, keeping that in mind, is incredibly important, and that comes with practice. All right, another thing you want to keep in mind when you're selecting these behaviors is the relevance to the behavior rule. So this one is understanding that you should pick and prioritize behaviors that are going to give a person natural reinforcement in their environment. What I'm talking about here is where we set up these like artificial situations for clients where we're always praising them and teaching them skills, and if we aren't praising them and giving them reinforcers all the time, the behavior isn't maintained because it's not naturally reinforced. So we'll see this with a lot of school skills. So if you aren't teaching a kid their ABCs every day, they're going to forget them over time. Whereas if we're talking about teaching a kid how to like make their own food, that's gonna be naturally reinforced by having, their favorite meal or having food in general, or teaching them how to drink out of a cup, because then they're naturally get reinforced by getting that hydration and their, needs met. Other ways that we can have that natural reinforcement environment is if we're teaching a kid to engage in a social group that's based off their interest. They're going to be reinforced by the social interactions if they're motivated to. This is why motivation is key. So again, we're tying in all of these terms and ideas and concepts, guys. So keeping in mind, will they get reinforced naturally for this in their environment? Will they seek out these behaviors in order to continue when they want to engage in these behaviors? So making sure you're picking behaviors that are important to their culture, environment, picking things that they want to do that's going to be important to that person and that family. And another example of this is how communication is really important. Communication is going to be naturally reinforced if you're teaching communication that's relevant to that client. So if you're teaching them how to ask for their favorite juice, their favorite snack, their favorite TV show, you're great. But if you're teaching them how to ask for things that you want them to be able to ask for, but they don't, it's not going to get naturally reinforced environment. They're not going to learn it, or they're not going to maintain it and generalize it, one or the other. They might learn it because you're giving them a cookie every time they do it, but if that's not relevant to the situation, the behavior, it's not going to maintain over time. The next one, another big term that a lot of people get confused, and I know I struggled with this when I was studying, behavioral cuffs, pivotal behavior. We've got two terms there. So behavioral cuffs are when you teach a learner, or learner understands how to go into new environments and access reinforcers that previously would not have been available. I'll give you some examples. Teaching somebody how to ride a bike to get to work or to drive, teaching somebody how to walk because now they can access, their all these different drawers and food from the pantry and all these different environments, and all these different reinforcers are now available when a child learns how to walk, crawl, communication. These are going to be those really big milestones, big skills. A good example that I was always so tripped up on is, so teaching somebody the behavioral cuffs of cooking is a big skill. And then you have your pivotal behaviors that are in there of learning how to use a microwave, learning how to use a stove, learning how to light the stove if you need to do that, learning how to, cut. Those are going to be really important behaviors that allow access to more reinforcers and more situations, but not a whole new environment. Now that you can be in the kitchen and cook, you have all these accesses to new reinforcers, new foods, new, learning opportunities, new skills to learn. It's much, much bigger as behavior cuffs. Pivotal behaviors into smaller behaviors. More pivotal behaviors would be like being able to manage your own behavior, or initiate into social situations. Able to go in and say hi to this new friend group at school, and then you're going to this new Boys and Girls Club and you're able to initiate interactions there. And you're able to initiate interactions, at the new board game club that you're in. Things like that are going to be able to generalize, and those are going to be pivotal behaviors that are really important skills, but it's not you learning how to talk like a behavior cusp would be. That would open you to all these new environments. I hope it kind of makes sense. In the literature, they are very vague. It's not, there are some things that are left up to interpretation. When you're looking at this kind of question on an exam, just think about, is this life changing or life helping? Up next, we got, is this behavior age appropriate? This one I would kind of take with a grain of salt. So you're going to have to use your judgment and the family's judgment and what's best for the client and what the client wants should all be considered. However, if somebody wants to engage in a behavior that is going to cause no harm to anybody else in their home or even out in public, it's completely legal and safe and allows them to access reinforcement and be happy, that's a very important factor, even if it's inappropriate. So I saw a question on one of those Facebook groups the other day that talked about teaching a 13-year-old or allowing a 13-year-old to play with Barbies. Is that appropriate? Is that inappropriate? Should we be, quote unquote, encouraging that or allowing that? That's where you're going to have to use your behavior analytical judgment and your code of ethics and understand, is this, something that I need to change or modify, or is it, appropriate? Is it fine? That I look at these type of situations in, is it causing harm? Is the person able to function day to day? Are they doing okay? Are they happy? Does this behavior make anyone unsafe? If not, then I don't see any reason to change it. We all have our own things that we do that might not be considered age appropriate. We all avoid things that we probably shouldn't avoid. So, an example is like doing dishes at night. We should probably do the dishes every night to keep up on our chores. That's the proper thing to do, but we don't do that. We are supposed to fold our clothes. But if you aren't the kind of person that folds your clothes every night, there's nobody that's going to be busting down your door telling you to fold your clothes. We shouldn't be making our clients do the same. And same thing for the little ones. If there's not somebody behind you that's telling you to, take a single bite per chicken nugget, then you shouldn't be doing that to your client. If they want to stab 6 nuggets onto one, bite and they're okay and they can chew it and they're safe, that's fine. You have to pick those battles and determine, what is most appropriate. Another example is if you have a little kid in circle time who likes to kind of sit on his knees and rock back and forth a little bit. Is that really a big deal? Is that age appropriate? Yes. Is it the most perfect thing in the world? No. But that's okay. We have to pick those battles and figure out, where can we compromise with this person? We have to be realistic. Age appropriate is really something I would take a grain of salt. However, when we're looking on the other side of that coin, so when we're talking about like academic skills and abilities, we should never be expecting a child, adolescent, adult to do anything that is above their skill level. For example, we shouldn't be expecting a young 2.5 year old, toddler or child to be sitting at a table for more than a few minutes. Even then, like they should be having breaks, being allowed to move and go. Like that's my big bone to pick with DTT is sitting kids at a table for long periods of time. Not age appropriate. That's not an expectation they would have in any other environment except this one. Inappropriate. So when you're looking at what's age appropriate, what's expected of a client outside of this environment, less restrictive environment, what should they be doing? What kind of skills? What are the educational standards? You can Google and look up your state's or your local school district's education standards and see, okay, what is a first grader expected to know? What math? What should their reading comprehension be? Like what skills should they have? That should be your judgment and your assessment tools you have, not your own personal bias or expectations or just the way you do things. So making sure you're making these decisions with a data-driven method, or you're having some type of standard or cross-checking going on, and making sure that you are sticking true to your client and what behaviors are best for them, not everybody else. Next thing is, will getting rid of this behavior have a replacement behavior? This one, you're going to always want to consider, okay, I need this behavior to go down. What can I replace with it? What is this alternative? This is where escape extinction comes in and really should not be used, like hardly at all. There might be a few situations where you make the call and it is justified. And, I trust you. I'm sure you're doing what's correct for your client. Keep in mind though, 99% of the other time, escape extinction is inappropriate because you're not teaching that replacement behavior. You have to teach that person how to get that need met another way. Or they're going to find another inappropriate way to get that need met. A good classic example is biting your nails. So if somebody just came up behind you and just pushed your hand down all day and you are an oral seeker, you're going to want something in your mouth. You're going to chew on your pen, an eraser, your fingers. You might start picking at your lips instead because that doesn't get punished. You need to give that person a replacement behavior, a way to communicate that they need to do that behavior, or an alternative, something that allows that person's need to get met. And this is one where communication comes in. If somebody needs a break, you shouldn't be trying to make them sit at the table and tolerate not getting a break at all. You need to communicate how to appropriately ask for that break. So if you're in a classroom setting, how does that person appropriately escape? That's what you need to do. That's where you come in and you help the situation out. Say, here's the expectation. You need to be able to sit at your table for this amount of time. You can ask for breaks, and we can slowly build up to that tolerance level of being able to do that skill. That's where shaping comes in. Maybe you teach some chaining to get that break, and what are the steps to do in order to request that break, take that break, and return back to the task. All those different skills you might come in and teach. Just remember, there should always be replacement behavior for any behavior looking to decrease. Next one is this problem behavior the actual problem, or is it a side effect or a cause from something else? Good example here is you're hungry, you get angry, you snap on people, you make rash decisions, you're quick to judgment, things like that. You're hungry. That's the problem. It's not your grumpiness. It's not, you could sit there quietly. We could decrease those behaviors. We could decrease, your outbursts, things like that. But that's not the problem. It's you being hungry. So we've got to look at those setting events. We've got to go to those antecedents and look and see what's the real issue here. Why is that kid really acting out? So that's where the functions behaviors can come in. But remember, we've got motivation, we've got SDs in the environment. There's a lot more going on. Kids have medication changes, sleep issues. Like, is the problem really that they're just a quote unquote bad kid, which no kid is bad. They deal with what they have. But is the problem the kid, or is it the lack of sleep, the unstable environment? Maybe the parents suffering medication change, anxiety issues, the classroom environment, the flickering lights. Like, you got to look at it all, and you've really got to determine, is this truly the issue? And it might be something that you figure out along the way where you're like, oh wait, this treatment isn't working, this BIP isn't working, that's not working. What is actually going on here? And that might be where you realize it's a sensory thing, or you misjudge the functions. And that's okay. You just gotta adjust and try to do better next time. Next one, is it just talk? Or is it really behavior? So remember, we can say all we want, but that doesn't mean that we should be reacting. Now, the limits here are where we start to get into the law, threats, threats of action. You've got to be careful with. However, if you have a little child or an adolescent who's saying, I'm so mad, I'm going to beat you up, but they never do anything, we shouldn't be punishing them as if they beat us up. If they're only ever going to talk and say that they're going to do these things, but they never actually do, we should take it serious. There are certain things that we should never doubt, like if they say they are going to harm themselves or harm others in a serious way, we should always treat that as if they were going to and react appropriately. If you have those more reactive threats, I'm going to push you, or I'm going to take your food, or I hate you, things like that, we have to be careful how we are reacting, and we're not punishing the behavior as if it happened, and we're working more on the social skills and the replacement behaviors or the alternative ways to say those feelings rather than threatening to inflict harm on others. Again, just keep in mind those cultural barriers, those legal barriers when you're picking those behaviors and you're trying to determine. We can target decreasing, those inappropriate statements. However, a person has a right to say what they want as long as they're not harming others. This is where, the control you have with BCBA can be really tricky. So you have to be careful. Am I taking away this person's rights? Are they allowed to say that and I just don't like it? Mom just doesn't like that? then we shouldn't be changing that. We could try to encourage them, like, hey, that hurts people's feelings. It's hard to make friends when we're doing that. If they don't care, they don't care. That's on them. We can try our best, but we can't force people to do things. This next one is when you are wanting, or the person is wanting, or the family is wanting those more broad, difficult to operationally define behaviors. So, like higher grades, better attendance, a happier life, lose weight, like those more broad things that we don't have like a true number data to. That's where we have to come in and figure out what those target behaviors are. Okay, so you want your child to have better grades. What is that? Do you want them to have all D's? Is it all C's? Is it straight A's? What's better attendance? You've got to ask those questions and get numbers and data, something measurable on it when you start to see those. So don't target when you're looking at your operational definitions and you're building your BIPs. Don't target those things that you aren't fully sure what the parent is wanting, because my expectation of good grades are going to be much different than your expectation of good grades. Same thing for attendance and happiness. Being able to find those measures and breaking down to smaller skills and goals is an important part of selecting a behavior. So Cooper goes through it and talks about 9 different things that you should look at when you're prioritizing a goal. I'm going to hit all them pretty quickly because they're pretty self-explanatory. I'll add what we need to on them. But when you are looking to prioritize behaviors, so you have like all these dream things that you looked at this client you think would be really helpful. You have some things that are a little bit more important, some things that, like it'd be nice to learn how to participate in group and go to the lunchroom. When we're starting to look at what to start with, where do we go first? These are the things you're going to look for. Does this behavior pose any danger to the client? That's your first and foremost question every single time. Is the client in danger? That should be your absolute top priority in that moment, no matter what, if the client's life or safety is in danger. And then same thing if it poses dangers to others, even if it's just talk, if they are threatening other people with serious harm or have the ability to act on that. So if they're saying that they're going to cut you and they have a knife nearby or a sharp object or scissors, that should be a situation where you are reacting in an appropriate manner, and that is to react. Up next is how many opportunities will this person have this behavior occur? So if you're trying to decide between, okay, I've got one more goal, I could target for this kiddo, and I want to either do eating utensils or hand washing. So you're thinking, which one is a little bit better over the other? Which one should I pick first? You might look at the prereqs. You might look at how many opportunities this person has to engage in this behavior. Can they eat throughout the day using these utensils? Or are you just working on a spoon for soup and they eat soup once a week? Maybe we shouldn't fill that, gold spot and that energy on that one, spoon scoop of soup a week yet, and focus on the hand washing because, they love to paint, so their hands are always getting dirty. So we look at those opportunities. How often are they going to be able to learn this skill and practice this and encounter it in the natural environment and get reinforced by it and have this maintaining skill? You're going to look at that. How long-standing is this skill deficit or behavior problem? Have they been doing it for many, many years, or is it brand new? You're going to want to look at that. Behaviors that have like a chronic reoccurrence that are impeding that person's life and happiness and things that they aspire to do, those are going to be more of a top priority. So like social skills, if they are wanting to engage, but they're, to them, they're socially awkward, so they get really nervous with anxiety about it. So we're going to want to approach that rather than like a behavior that occurs on the occasion. It's rare, about once a month. And again, this is where that hierarchy starts. So if you're working on these social skills and you're teaching them how to interact and initiate conversations, what they want to do, they want to talk about their favorite interest of Pokemon, and they're having a blast. But then when things don't go right, or if the person doesn't know Pokemon and they start banging their head on the ground because they're so upset, now your priorities have changed. So you can continue working on social skills, but you've got to work on that head banging. That's your top priority. You're going to remediate the situation. If you need to stop working on social skills because that's when the head banging gets triggered, that's what you need to do. So that priorities might be constantly shifting and changing as you go, and that's okay. Will this behavior change produce higher rates of reinforcement in that person's life? If they are able to access more environments, more reinforcement, more joy, the things they like, that behavior should be prioritized over others. So if it's a barrier that is making it so they can't interact with the things that they want to do, so like let's say they want to really learn how to swing on the swing by themselves, but they have a few behavior barriers that are in place and they go to the swing every day, but they just don't know how. That might be something we teach first because for them, that's really important and that's all that matters. Assuming there aren't other things that we need to target first. The next one is, what is the importance of the skill in terms of like prereqs and future skills? So is this like a foundation building block skill to independence and academic success? That might be one we want to target, over like the swinging behavior if we're, picking and choosing here. Because if we have a behavior that's a pivotal behavior that can lead us to like a behavior cusp of, let's say driving a car and they want to get their first job and that's their barrier, that's going to be really important. That's a foundation skill. Doing writing, they love to color and they want to learn how to trace, but they just aren't there yet. That might be a behavior that we want to teach because what a behavior cusp, learning how to write. Will altering this behavior reduce the social stigma for that person? Now I say this one again with caution. When we are talking about this one, it has to be the person's motivation and interest. Will allow them to engage in environments that they're wanting to engage in but currently can't because of particular behaviors. An example is this person wants to go to the basketball game but they can't because they aren't wearing their shirt or they have to take their shoes off and that's not allowed. We're going to work on that so that way they can encounter those environments that they're wanting to and it's their lead. We should never decrease behaviors just for the comfort of others. Now, again, laws, cultural factors, social factors all play into this, but use your behavior analytical brain in training to think what's most appropriate, what's best for my client here. I understand the family wants this or that, but what is best for the client? Will this behavior, and I hit on this one earlier, help the significant other or caregiver? So again, this is that mutual relationship. If we can teach those little modifications to make the autistic person's life easier and more rewarding and getting to the things they want faster and help the caregiver, that's great. So them learning how to feed themselves could be really helpful for that caregiver. Them learning how to microwave their own food without supervision, really helpful. Dressing could be really helpful for that caregiver. Being able to write or sign their own name on documents might be something really important, or put in their own PIN. Or, for like little kids, then being able to say, my tummy hurts, that might be really important. Being able to take medicine could be another part to helping that caregiver relationship. Next to consider is, how likely are you to be successful in changing this behavior? I love this one being on here because it is important to remember we can't change every behavior. We're not, wizards here. We talked about that back in one of our very first few podcasts, talking about how we are behavior analytical, we try to modify the environment, but we are just one sliver of psychology. A lot of behavior issues could be from post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression. Those aren't things that we are going to be equipped to treat in every situation. And if our interventions are not working or unlikely to work, we shouldn't try. We shouldn't be targeting goals that we aren't going to be effective at. Or if a person has some major skill deficits, for example, if they want to learn how to play poker and play with their friends, because all their friends know how to play poker, so they want to too, but they really struggle with the fine motor of holding cards, and every time they try, they get really frustrated and it's just not working. No matter how hard you try, you're not being successful. Maybe it's time to let that one go and work on... Actually, I take that back, because there's other things that we could do, always being creative in our programming. So if the person can't hold the cards, maybe we get one of those like little plastic card holder things that you put the cards in and it holds them for you. So try that first if you ever encounter that. But Cooper talks about in this one, how experienced are you? What are your limitations as well? So if you don't know how to change this behavior, if this is beyond your scope of practice and there's nobody for you to consult with in that time, maybe this is behavior that you need to hold off on treating. Maybe it's a behavior that you need to give some time to get more CEUs, more practice, and more understanding, and then you come back to it. That might be another reason why you prioritize behaviors, which I think is a really good point to know your limits. And then also with that, it could be a resource thing. So if you don't have the funding, the family doesn't have the funding, the person doesn't have the funding to do these things. So like I would love to learn how to, drive a really fancy car, but if I can't afford to buy a fancy car to learn how to do that, it might not be an option. Like learning how to drive like a stick shift, if that's like a huge goal for a person, but they don't have access to a car that has a stick shift or the funds to buy that car, it might not be realistic for them. The last one is how much does it quote unquote cost to change this behavior? This one is kind of that like insurance businessy side of ABA you gotta consider. I think it'd be amazing to teach, this skill or that skill for this learner. Like it would be life changing for them. It'd be so wonderful. But if it's gonna take 3 years for them to learn all these different skills and chains, is it worth it? That's what you're gonna have to consider. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it, but maybe there's like all these other skills that we could also be working on rather than this one skill so intensely for years. Like for me, communication and giving a mode of communication, something that we're gonna spend on years nonstop, always worth it. Like an example is if you have to spend like the entire day working on fine motor skills over and over and they're just not grasping the concepts, maybe we should redirect our attention to something else that's going to be a little bit more appropriate and they are learning. Maybe that's just a skill deficit for them that they're going to have, and that's okay. You're going to teach them the skills that they need in order to be successful in life, or teach them how to use those alternative options and tools to assist their life. Maybe we pivot. Maybe we don't because it's really important. That's where you're going to have to talk to the client, the family, whoever is applicable in that situation. And then another thing I want to hit on is the behavior that you're picking, socially significant. BCBAs, we are only going to focus on the things that are socially significant because that's one of our characteristics of ABA. We know that. It's important to have our applied skills for our clients. We want what we're doing to matter for them and matter to the environment and those around them. So making sure we're picking skills that are life-changing. A good example here is considering, is a child being able to recite their ABCs perfectly for 3 consecutive days socially significant? Maybe. Maybe in their environment it's a really important part of attendance of class, but maybe not. Maybe we don't need to say our ABCs. At the end of the day, we're going to do okay if we don't. That's for you and the family to decide what is socially significant. A more relevant example too would be like ironing our clothes. Like, do we need to teach that person to iron their shirt and pants and spend all the time the skills and safety measures that we need to do in order to teach that skill? Is that socially significant nowadays? I would say probably not. I don't think it's that important. I don't iron my clothes. Most people don't. So considering, like, sure, in the aphorism might say to do that in that assessment tool, but is it socially significant? Is it important for the client? Is it relevant anyway? Are they going to like a big job interview where maybe they want to and they feel they should? Something like that. Got to think about the client and what is most important. Okay. So we've taken all those factors, and these aren't things you need to memorize in the sense of I go through these 9 things every single time I think about it. Just something to keep in mind as you start to prioritize behaviors in your thinking. If you're ever stuck, I would definitely recommend taking a peek back at those. But it's not something you need to like memorize and go through every single time. Just consider it. Consider your decision-making process there. Once you pick that behavior, you are ready to define it. We are talking behaviors for increase and behaviors for decrease, academic skills. What are we looking at? What are we targeting here? Let's move our target behavior. We are going to talk about operationally defining it. We are going to get much more in depth with this one when we talk about applications, and we are talking about different behavior intervention methods, and we're talking about all of that. Operationally defining is something that's going to take practice. It's going to take something that you have to have quality supervision for. Hopefully learn how to do this one in your master's program. But when we're looking at operationally defining behaviors, we are talking about making sure what I am reading and seeing is what I agree this definition says, and you can agree with that definition, what it says. We are agreeing that that is exactly what is happening. There's 2 types of ways we can operationally define something. We have a functional and topography. So a functional definition is the response class and how it interacts in the environment, the function it has on the environment, the impact. A good example of this is mouthing. So we aren't worried about how the mouthing looks every single time. Same thing with like dumping a bin. So if we're tracking like dumping bins because a kid loves to dump out bins of toys. We don't need to know exactly how it looks. They do it two hands, one hand. We just see that they are dumping the bin, objects come out. Whereas a topography intervention is going to be the look. So we are going to be talking about how behavior looks. We don't care about the impact on the environment. The function, purpose of it doesn't matter. They could be going to hit a balloon. It doesn't matter. If they complete that motion, it's throwing under that definition.
Hello, it's features there here. I wanted to throw in a few things I forgot to throw in when I filmed this I think are really, really important that we cannot skip over. For operationally defining behaviors, we need to make sure it's objective, it's clear, and it's complete. Those three keywords are incredibly important, so make sure you memorize those. For objective, the definition should be objective, referring only to observable characteristics of the behavior and environment if needed, or translating any subjective terms such as feelings, intended, or showing interest in into more objective terms. The definition should be clear in that it should be readable and unambiguous so that experienced observers could read it and readily paraphrase it accurately. I'm going to read what Cooper says about the definition being complete. It says, the definition should be complete, delineating the boundaries of what is to be included as an instance of the response and what is to be excluded, thereby directing the observers in all situations that are likely to occur and leaving little to their judgment. This is examples and non-examples. If you went to Ball State, I know for sure it does examples and non-examples in all of their programs and all of their like target behaviors, and that could be really useful. I always try to use that to my advantage. You can ask yourself if the definition of a target behavior is objective, clear, and complete. Ask yourself these three simple questions. Can you count the number of times the behavior occurs, or is it too vague? Will a stranger know exactly what to look for when you tell him or her the target behavior if you read in that definition? Can they do it? Can you break down the target behavior into smaller behavioral components, each of which is more specific and observable than the original target behavior? Your answer should be no on that. It should be as small, as clear as it possibly could be. Like I said, we are going to practice these much, much more when we go into applications. But just understand these concepts and understand how to set the criteria for behavior change and how to write these observational definitions and target behaviors. Down pat. We'll practice though. I got you.
All right, guys, thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And make sure you guys check out my Patreon. I'm going to be uploading that full mock very, very soon. I'm very excited about it. It'll probably be a little bit later in the week so I can go through it and make sure it's nice and tidy and ready for you guys. But thank you so much for listening. I hope you guys have a great week. Bye, guys.